Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. I hope, as usual, all of the listeners are doing just as fantastic. This is one of the most interesting and I feel like very important conversations we've had in a while. We always try to go back to identifying why people get themselves into a situation where they end up missing, or they find themselves in a situation where they're being taken advantage of, and there's no exception to how this happens. And right now we live in a digital age and information is flying everywhere, and our information is probably on more platforms than we even know about. Probably hundreds of platforms know a ton of stuff about me that I am not aware of, and I'm sure that is the case with a lot of individuals, a lot of our listeners. But we have a guest on today who might be able to help a little bit. But Tim, again, I've just rambled on for far too long. How are you?
Doing great over here. Thanks a lot. Yeah, very exciting guest we have on today, and I'm excited to introduce this conversation. Our guest is Theresa Payton, who was the first female chief information officer at the White House from 2006 to 2008. And she established the first dedicated 24/7 security operations center at the White House, which set a new standard for cybersecurity. And really, that's where she lives. Cybersecurity, Lance. You know, I think a lot of people who are listening to this episode are going to learn a lot today, how to be safer in their digital lives. And Theresa's really a great person to learn this information from. She's also an author. She's written a few books. One of them is really interesting. It's called Manipulated: Inside the Cyber War to Hijack Elections and Distort the Truth. And we speak with Theresa a little bit about that one, but she does have a couple others as well.
And this isn't just exclusive to politics or your information being sold for ad purposes or something to that effect. If you're in a situation and it's an abusive situation and you're finding yourself being bullied or stalked or any of these, or you know somebody, individuals can easily figure out a way to make someone's life a living hell if they have a small amount of knowledge in regards to manipulating information that is online. They can really make somebody's life miserable if they tried. So aside from election hacking and government secrets, etc., on a personal level, this can be very informative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope it helps all of our listeners. So, check out Theresa Payton's work online. There are links in the show notes to check out her books and to really just listen to what she says and take it seriously, because, you could regret it if you don't take these cybersecurity questions seriously.
Protect yourselves, people.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. Follow us on social media at Missing CSM. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Theresa Payton. Theresa Payton, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you on, and we're kind of chuckling here because we just went through a little bit of technical difficulties, and that was probably the fifth time that we've welcomed you to the program. So
I feel welcomed. I'm happy.
If you want us to do it again, we can always welcome you a sixth time. But it's been such a pleasure and sort of a mind bend reading your work and looking into what you do. But for those out there who are unfamiliar with you, can you please let the listeners know who you are and, a little bit about what brings you to the show?
Yeah, sure. Just a little bit about me. I worked in the financial services industry. And then from there, did a little stint over at a place called the White House in Washington, D.C. Worked for President George W. Bush from 2006 to 2008 as the first female to ever hold the role of Chief Information Officer. And after leaving the White House, I decided to dedicate my career to focusing on protecting everybody's safety, security, and privacy. And so I've got a consulting services firm, Fortalice Solutions, where we focused on basically designing for the human user story, making sure that it's safe, private, and secure. and have done a few other fun things, written a couple books, have a co-author, Ted Claypool, for 2 books, wrote Manipulated by myself, and did a little reality TV show along the way called Hunted, where we actually hunted ordinary, everyday citizens who were trying to stay off the grid for cash prize money.
How do I sign up for that show?
It was great fun. We really loved it. And actually, we've actually done a smaller version of the show for events, like team building events, which has been great fun as well.
Very cool. Very cool.
Wow. Yeah. Can you tell us what it was like working in the White House as the chief information officer?
An incredible honor. It is a pressure cooker job because, obviously, White House operations are 24/7, and nation states and cyber criminals are also working 24/7. And so, my job was really, the way I looked at it was to enable the mission of the White House, no matter where the staff were, whether it was the president, the vice president, the first lady's office, the cabinet members, the 3,000 plus staff that serve at the executive office of the president, making sure no matter where they were in the world, whether it was Washington, D.C., the United States more broadly, or international travel, that it was if they were sitting at their desk. And so making sure that things from a human user story worked really well for them, but by the way, also keeping it secure.
What years were you there?
2006 to 2008. So if you think about this is a time where the first iPhone came out in 2007. A lot of conversations around, is it going to be Facebook or MySpace that wins sort of the social media wars? All kinds of very interesting transformations in technology. But it does seem like we almost didn't know how good we had it back then. It does sound a little quaint.
Right. Quaint is a great way to put it. Yeah, that was my reason for asking, because Facebook started in 2004 and you were just like 5 years removed from the September 11th attack. So the White House was still at, a higher state of, I'm sure, like threat alerts. And all of a sudden this thing called social media just comes into our universe in such a massive, influential way. What was that like? Like, how did people wrap their heads around what this new thing was?
Yeah, I mean, what was great too about President George W. Bush and many of the senior executives around him is their focus was on, hey, we need to make sure that we're thinking about things in a way that no matter who is sitting in the chair of the Oval Office, no matter who, which party is in power, that we put in place an infrastructure and an approach that's dynamic and flexible, because technology comes and goes. What's hot and what's not definitely comes and goes over time. And so you really can't get wedded to, well, this is the technology, and focus and build everything around that. You really need to think more. And that's why I always focus on that human user story and designing for that. And then that way you looked at technology as more of a plug and play into that human user story. I often think sometimes, when I look at some of the other systems around the U.S. government and even sometimes corporations, a lot of times technology almost seems like you think about the human last. I'll give you a quick example with that. Raise your hand if either one of you love strong passwords. The longer the better. And the more they expire and can't look like the last 15 that you used. Do you love that? See, Tim and Lance, neither one of you raised your hands, right? And that's an example of where, when we were designing security solutions for you, like you were the last thing we thought about, right? From a technology perspective. So that was always the focus is, how can we, in a seamless, elegant, and, why not a really cool and sexy way, make sure that people can use their technology while making security something more of the fabric of the human user story instead of this clunky add-on to the human user story. So to me, if you focus on that, you can sunrise and sunset different technologies, but the human story, stays the same.
I was checking out your book, Manipulated, Inside the Cyber War to Hijack Elections and Distort the Truth. Very interesting stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about this book, this story, and what made you write it?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is I was looking at social media and the fact that we didn't really have transparency around the algorithms in social media, and candidly still don't. And was looking at the data collection and then how the algorithms decided what you were served up with, and thinking this could be a real problem, because if you end up having algorithms serving up different things and then you try to create sort of this fact checking type of scenario that might be human based or it might be technology based, but who are the humans engineering it? And I thought, this is a real problem. And I was seeing a lack of transparency around, who fact checks the fact checkers and who's monitoring accounts. There's no bouncer sitting at the front of a social media platform or even an email or, kind of a big tech platform where you can share things saying, okay, I need to see that you're a real human being. And you say your name is Tim, but is that really your name, Tim? Is that really you? Or are you, are you really a dog? Sort of the New Yorker cartoon from so many years ago that said, the internet doesn't really know if you're a dog. That's true. It doesn't know if you're a dog, a person, a bot, a nation state operative. And so I had these concerns. And I remember going to my book agent and saying, I really want to write this book. Manipulated about how, social media, we could all be manipulated. And with technology changing, I was concerned you wouldn't be able to discern between a real human or a synthetic fake identity and things like that. And she said, well, what's the fix for it? And I said, well, there is no fix. I just need to warn people. And she said, Theresa, nobody wants to read a horrifying book that is nonfiction that has no fix. People are not going to read the book. So I had to keep going back and think about it. And so I approached her in about 2014, 2015 on this concept. 2016 election cycle happened, and finally got the chance to get a publisher who was like, okay, I believe in sort of this concept. And so we were able to put out the first version of the book in 2020 and the second version of the book out in 2024. And my goal there was basically I wanted to entertain people. So I've got these little fictional vignettes that open up a lot of the chapters and then kind of tell people what's going on. And what I really wanted to do was alert the public that Superman is not coming to save us. And so the government won't do anything. Social media is not totally sure what to do. Nation states absolutely know what they want to do, and they game the system. And so it's really up to us to take care of ourselves, take care of our friends and family, and to be more aware and to really do our own fact checking, our own research, and, to basically warn people. And it's not just manipulation of our minds on how to vote and not vote, even though that can play a factor. But I'm also seeing how manipulation schemes are being used by fraudsters. And so they're manipulating people's emotions and they're taking advantage of them. You've probably heard about romance schemes. And it's really turning into significant dollar losses for individuals. People are getting emotionally manipulated through the misuse of technology. Social media is not bad. Even deepfake technology, in and of itself, the technology is not bad. It's the misuse of that technology and using it to trick and manipulate somebody that is. So that was really my goal behind the book, was to warn people of what's coming, and more importantly, how to prepare your friends, your family, your business, so that people don't get manipulated, because people get manipulated into clicking on links, opening attachments, they fall prey to scams. They may get disenfranchised and not vote. It really just depends. And so hopefully for those people who have read the book, they've found it incredibly helpful to warn themselves and warn people that they care about.
Yeah, not only is it incredibly helpful and insightful, but it's also a little bit more reassuring than I think you're giving it credit for, because a lot of these things are thoughts that at least I had in my head, but I just needed some sort of professional confirmation that, these things are possible, and I'm not classifying myself as like a conspiracy theorist, because throughout ages, we've always had people in power manipulating their communities, and it's just happened for thousands of years. They just use a different platform to do so. But I'm curious, when you mention nation states, can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. And so kind of the biggest generators, if you will, of manipulation campaigns from a nation state perspective are Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. They're certainly not the only ones. Iraq, Syria, Turkey, we'll talk about the United States as well, have been known to create propaganda. Let's talk about the first set of nation states that I mentioned. They're incredibly good at doing manipulation campaigns, and they focus first on their own citizens. So what they do is they portray other countries, namely the United States, but certainly European countries as well, as complete, utter dumpster fires to show their citizens why you don't want that. You don't want regime change. You don't want a republic. You don't want a democracy. You want what we have, because look at what a train wreck they are. And it's like, you know what? We know we're not perfect. And that's what's great about America and other democracies around the world. But guess what? We get to talk about how we're not perfect so that we can get better. We get to talk about the things we like. We get to talk about the things we don't like. And we can have elections and have change. And that's what's great about who we are. So are we messy? Yes. Do we sometimes have dumpster fires? Of course we do. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't want to give up my constitutional rights to freedom to have whatever it is Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran think they're serving up for their citizens. So that's up to their citizens, and that's up to the people that they allow to be in power. But they do a really good job on manipulation campaigns on their own citizens. They then take the perfection of those algorithms, those manipulation campaigns, those stories, and then they do try to meddle in other countries' affairs. And that's one of the things that I found in working on Manipulated. One of the biggest ahas I had in doing edition number 1, so approaching the 2020 elections, was in my mind, I thought, based on researching propaganda, there's been propaganda on the world since there were 2 human beings walking the earth, right? I mean, their propaganda is nothing new, but the distribution of it on social media is fairly new, a few decades old. And so when I first started diving into this, what I thought it would really be about is about creating political unrest, maybe picking winners and losers. But the one thing I uncovered that really surprised me was how much money nation states make by promoting manipulation campaigns. So as we get engaged, we post, we like, we don't like, we talk about it, we repost it, they were making pennies on the click. And so they were making loads of money. And so if you're a nation state and you want to money launder, get around sanctions, you want to fund your operations, social media is a great place to do it. You can actually make money doing it.
How does that work? Like, how do the dynamics of that work?
So you basically, just at a real high level, creating clickbait news sites and getting ad revenue by promoting stories that look true. Maybe on their surface they were true, but they're repackaged, creating sort of these quasi news sites, creating then basically inauthentic accounts, and then posting, engaging, and reposting, and making basically clickbait money.
And now, where does cyber election attacks come into this?
Yes, I talk about that a little bit, and I think the biggest challenge. So a lot of people say, well, you could have U.S. election, a massive hacking of U.S. elections. And the one thing that is great about our process is each state has, they've got the federal rules, but each state governs how their citizens show up and vote. And so we don't have like one voting system per se. And so that can actually be very helpful. So the idea that a nation state could like hack into all the equipment and change the votes, we don't really have that issue, but we do have other issues, right? So you've got the social media manipulation, anything from telling people the wrong information, like there is no early voting, or voting is stopped, or you're not allowed to vote here, or you can vote online. So people were actually sent messages telling them that you could vote online because of COVID, and that's not exactly how that works, right? So there's concerns around sort of the sanctity of the information that the citizens get in voting. Now, we do know that there have been different occasions around voting irregularities that have been found, but that's down to each board of election at each state to certify and say whether or not the votes as counted were counted appropriately, properly, without issues, and then basically remedying any issues that may have happened with machines and things like that. So manipulation campaigns around the information are problematic. We did see from an election security standpoint, from time to time, election websites for different states do get attacked. And so that's why it's always so important for people to have, go to different trusted vetted news sources. So there's your state board of elections website. There's kind of your local news that you can take a look at. And I always tell people, even if it looks like you're looking at the news on social media, you can do a lot with deepfake technology. You need to go to the trusted vetted news website. Don't just trust that, oh, that looks like that's what CNN or my local news or MSNBC or whoever, don't just look at it on social media. Go to the trusted vetted news site and do your homework and make your decisions for yourself based on doing the homework.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
How do the powers that be who control that sort of manipulation, how do they identify what it is in somebody that is going to keep them on that particular site and not go and do those other checks and say okay, I'm going to check over here and really just cover all my bases? What is there a hook that they have?
Yeah, one of the people that I talked to as part of doing the research for my book, there's a whole chapter called Hacker X, and it was somebody who was involved, actually a U.S. person that was involved in manipulation schemes and campaigns. And kind of the thought process was he did an incredible job studying demographics. So he said, based on the demographic work that he did, the analytical work he did, he knew exactly which voter would be logging in online at what time and what they wanted. And so he said, for example, I knew, the working moms who are dropping their kids off at school, they want to start their day off with something light. They want to see puppies, kittens, and rainbows. And he said, but in the middle of the day, when they take their lunch break at work, they want to see what's going on with the news. And then by the end of the day, they want to see things that are kind of family friendly. And he had this demographic down by age, working, not working, every demographic. And then he would actually craft news and pushing out news on social media websites and craft his algorithms to push the content that you, Lance, or Tim, or me would want to see down to a 15-minute increment of the day. So he knew demographics and user statistics better than most corporations do. If he was some corporation's marketing media person, man, he would be getting their message out for them. But he got hired by a firm who, one, wanted to beat Hillary Clinton, two, wanted to make loads of money, and three, they wanted basically a burn it down to the ground button for the operation so that they would never get caught. And he did all that for them. I mean, he literally said after the election was over, it was hit the button and burn it down to the ground. And he said, when I interviewed him, he showed me a couple of different things that his team was able to do. He and his team, he was pretty much, he didn't trust people, so he mostly ran all of the brains and genius behind it. And then he had some people helping him. If he had Gen AI, it would be crazy if he had access to that kind of technology, because this was the this predates ChatGPT and things like that being available. And he would push out these things. And what's interesting is some of them got picked up as, oh, these were Russian operatives who did this. So we literally had people doing, quote, fact checking and misinformation checking and associating it with Russian operatives when really it was US citizens working in the United States who were part of this operation. So that's how they knew, is they really studied the human user story. They really focused on each of us as people and what makes us tick. And so that's how they knew when you were going to be there. They knew what you wanted. I mean, it's almost like they kind of were the early setters of like a TikTok algorithm, right? And because I always tell people, whatever social media platform you sign up for, be careful what you look at when you first come to it, because the internet wants to give you more and the algorithm wants to give you more of what you came for. So you won't leave. You'll leave for shorter periods of time. You'll come back and you'll stay. And he was kind of like an early thinker and engineer on that, if you will.
Wow. This is some frightening stuff to I imagine a lot of people. How can typical folks keep their personal data safe?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question. And, one thing I think everybody doesn't realize is that, every time you or I search for directions, share a photo, swipe a credit card, we're leaving digital breadcrumbs. And for most of us, this is just a routine part of how we live our lives now. But when you think about it, whether it's manipulation schemes, whether it's algorithms of tech platforms, or even investigators, based on what you talk about typically in your podcast, and sadly, bad people, predators, these digital trails can tell a story about each of us that are far more revealing than we ever intended or can candidly even remember, right? And so this is something that we really have to think about. And again, Superman's not coming to save us. I've been calling for a long time. And, Ted Claypool and I wrote about this in our book, Privacy in the Age of Big Data, which has been out in 2 editions. And I've been saying for a long time, especially in the United States, we need an individual privacy bill of rights. GDPR is nice for European citizens, doesn't go nearly far enough. And candidly, privacy is power. What you know about me as a big tech firm, as an insurance firm, people get focused on government surveillance. I'm like, well, they're kind of in line and they're not first in line actually about everything they know about you. And I need the ability to see what everybody's collecting about me. And if you're going to monetize what you collected about me, I should get a share of that. So if you're going to make a buck off me, I should get 50 cents. And I should be allowed in plain English to opt out and say, you know what? You don't get to monetize me and you don't get to collect that data. And if it means my human user story experience when I interact with you as a vendor is a little less convenient, so be it. But right now, it's not in our face that we're giving up our power by giving up our privacy. So I can save 50 cents on a gallon of milk. I mean, milk is expensive, right? And so people are trading off privacy in the name of savings. But that privacy that we each have is our power. And whether it's consumer power, whether it's who I am. So even if people say, well, I'm a good person, I have nothing to hide, and I'm not an important person, so therefore criminals aren't after me, still, at the end of the day, your privacy is your power. So, and nobody's looking out for us. We have to look out for ourselves.
Yeah, this is super eye-opening. And I keep thinking about back when it was unusual and I guess Twilight Zone-ish when you'd have a conversation with somebody and you'd talk about something and then you'd start getting the ads for it and everyone's like, oh, they're listening, and now it's normal. Now it's like, oh, okay, I guess like this is what we do now and this is who we are. And the other thing that keeps coming to mind is I thought I was like skirting the whole cookies system online by going in and deselecting things and being like, oh, you're not going to get me. And then I actually read it and it's like, okay, it just means that you'll just get a ton of other things that have no relevance to what you're looking up. So you're going to get inundated with stuff. You might as well get inundated with stuff that you've been, looking up. And I don't know. That was just me venting, but like, what's your advice on that? Like, and what is the purpose of this? Is it just to make us all like continue to consume?
Yeah, a big part of it is to monetize you. So, for example, to be able to say, we have this many people. So, I'll give you an example. I used to have banking internet access, and we didn't do it to spy on you. We were really doing it to understand, when do you come to our website? What time of day do you come? What transactions are you doing? When do you end up, we called it bombing out. When did you end up like abandoning the website or bombing out or timing out? And we did it to improve your user experience, but also to look at like, oh, where do we need to add more volume to our applications, so you're not timing out, so you're not bombing out, so that you're having the best customer user experience possible. But it also told us things like, well, what web browser are our customers on? And do we need to start sending alerts to them like, this isn't a very secure browser? We're not going to support this browser because it's too old, and things like that. So that's like an example of, we're really focused on your user experience. Then you start to look at like other companies, and part of what they're focused on is, well, who are you? Where did you come from before you came to me? And where are you going to next? And so that's more about, what can I sell to you? How can I keep you here? And then how can I make you part of like my overall numbers, so I can convince other people to use this platform and sell ads and sell marketing on this platform to them. So there's like a difference between, I'm here to serve you and I'm collecting this information, and that's why I have, customer service cookies or things like that. And then there's another thing, which is, I need to know everything about you so I can sell more to you. And, oh, by the way, sell things about you to other people, or convince other people, you want to be on my platform, you want to have ads here, because this is where the cool kids are at. And I can show you that because I track them when they came to visit.
Can you tell us a little bit about the role of internet sleuths in solving mysteries using openly available data?
Yeah, and this can be both good and bad. Sometimes there are mistaken identities and the wrong people are identified, but obviously it can be incredible in helping find missing people, somebody who's in danger, helping find a missing person. I mean, these are all things that can be helpful. And really, anybody with a computer and a little bit of skills can actually contribute, right? And so, but you want to make sure you do it in an ethical way. And then, so like, for example, if you look at Gabby Petito's case, you had TikTok users analyzing her Instagram posts, her travel logs, and they helped authorities pinpoint where she might have last been seen. Obviously, though, these same tools, if they're used inappropriately, they could be exploited by bad actors. For example, if you're in a stalking situation, a stalking person could use things like tags on Instagram, public Venmo transactions, if you don't know how to make them private, to track somebody's movements. So that can be, kind of a very challenging situation, that misuse of technology. But when you look at something like Gabby Petito, who knows? Law enforcement is so overwhelmed with so many missing persons cases. If the internet hadn't cared about that case and tried to look for clues to help law enforcement, would we have ever found? Would we have ever found everything that we needed to know about that? And so I think that's hard. Another one, I think, the Golden State Killer. If you think about like technology, there's a little bit of OSINT there, but you have like the DNA databases like GED Match, which the Golden State Killer, they were able to, kind of, a lot of people use the DNA databases not just for tracking of criminals, but you also have people doing genealogy. Are you Irish? Are you Italian? Am I related to royalty? The chances of that, probably slim, but a lot of people will, kind of do these DNA matches. When you look at like recent cases, you can see where this can be incredibly helpful. Now, the hard part is you can have a lot of signal noise. And so how do the police take all these helpful things that are found and sort through them to really get to this is actually something legitimate that I can apply to the case. Because I can tell you, even when we did Hunted, we actually had a tip line, and we would tell people like, this is part of a reality TV show. This is not a dangerous criminal. But we would put up a tip line, trying to capture people as part of the contest. And we had to sift through a lot of people who just want to call a tip line. So, I'm not going to make a judgment on, why they called the tip line, but they really didn't have a tip. They just wanted to talk to somebody. They had different theories about, kind of the tip they were giving. And it really wasn't helpful to the case, but we still had to log all of the tips that came in. So that's like an example of, how it can be challenging to know how to vet all of the helpful things that come in. But absolutely, internet sleuths have played such a helpful role. I mean, if you think about like Hannah Kobayashi, right? So you had there's surveillance footage and ticket purchase, the Greyhound bus ticket. And, we had something similar even in our reality TV show Hunted. We had two of our fugitives went and got cash, put on disguises, and actually bought a bus ticket. And I thought it was so obvious. I was like, they're not getting on the bus, but we'll like have to tag that bus and try to intercept that bus just in case they did. And they really thought because they had disguises on that we weren't going to catch them. But that information that was able to be collected around, hey, there's surveillance cameras here. I think this is the person who's using cash, standing here trying to buy a ticket, potentially looking like the person's, potentially around the date and time. That left digital breadcrumbs. So some of those are things only available to law enforcement. Some of them are only available to Greyhound bus, but some of them can be things that end up being online as part of like open source cameras and, things like that can pick up CCTV footage that might also be on a camera that's publicly available. A lot of people don't realize part of intelligence investigations, there's so many security cameras that are just open to the internet that you can just go take a look at. And some of them are set up to like let you look at, national monuments and things like that, but you can also look at other things. So I can't underestimate, I have placed so much value on what really smart people who just care very much, that they may or may not even get paid a reward, but they just care very much about helping other people. And internet sleuths have been a big part of solving a lot of cases. And candidly, if it were my loved one or it were me missing, I would want the internet to help find me or find my loved one.
What about if you were law enforcement? I mean, you worked in the White House, so I'm just going to say like that's sort of like being in law enforcement. But how does law enforcement come to terms and come to a cooperative, productive relationship with those responsible citizen sleuths who are using all of this information when the law enforcement is just not resourced enough to do that?
Yeah, I've seen this actually work really well. I've seen where, so for anybody listening that's involved with law enforcement in their community, I have seen some really great best practices where law enforcement would say, if you have a tip that you have from social media, here's our part of our task force who's going to be handling those tips. Because it is a different set of training than I think I saw, here's a license plate, right? So that's one set of skills. Hey, I was on Reddit and I saw a thing and I followed Reddit and I went over to PimEyes with the photo and then PimEyes told me this. And so then I went, like suddenly you're talking to a different, set of training for that person, right? And so I've actually seen it work really well from a best practice to say, if you've seen something on social media and you feel like it's important to this case, within the task force, you can call this separate number, or you can submit your tip here, either anonymously, or if you feel like you want to get a call back and, if there's reward money for tips, you can identify yourself. And so I think that's a really great best practice because now you can hand that over to trained people. If somebody's handing you metadata, right, from an OSINT investigation, and they hand it off to somebody who hasn't been trained in receiving that, then they're going to have a hard time knowing what to do with it. And so since you can't train everybody, on social media intelligence, on signals intelligence, on human intelligence collection off of gaming sites and things like that. You've got to have a group that can at least field those things and give it to an expert who can say, oh, I know how to go on Twitch and follow up on something like that, or I know how to, because there's so many different platforms, and having training can help somebody really understand, do I have, is there a there on this lead that we've been given?
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Do you have any other best practices that some of our listeners could put into play in their lives for privacy?
Yeah, sure. A couple of things. I always think about how can you create, the term firewall, right? And so how can you create sort of these different firewalls in your life to not only give yourself more privacy, but some security. So that way, if somebody is able to sort of walk in on a digital part of your life, they can't get to everything. So an example at a very simple level could be you have more than one email address that you use. Maybe you have one that you reserve for your bank accounts and your health insurance, because health insurance fraud is a real thing. And maybe a different email account that's tied to your social media accounts. Same thing with your phone number. The phone number that you use for banking and financial transactions, and maybe your multi-factor authentication, maybe that's a different number than the number you give to social media companies, coupon companies, your DoorDash service, all of those different things. And it's so much easier now to set up sort of these burner numbers and burner emails, if you will, and then not have to log into all of them and still send them to a central point like your phone. So for example, I have a Google Voice number that I use versus my real cell phone number. And so that gives me some segregation in my life. So if a fraudster gets a hold of my Google Voice number and then starts to try to pretend like they're my banker, I know that's not my banker. So find these ways to sort of create those firewalls, if you will. And then the next piece is have a trust but verify. So if somebody does call you, even if it says your bank's name, and they're calling you unsolicited to tell you you have a fraud issue, most likely it's not them. So say to them, okay, that's great. I'm going to hang up and call my banker first. So you can write their name down, you can write the phone number down, hang up, go to your authoritative phone number that you have for your banker or their website, bank@whatever.com. Call them and say, I just got this call. I literally did this 2 weeks ago. I said, I got a call from this person. They said their name was this. They said they were calling me to talk to me about my account. I don't know who this person is, but I do know you. So why would this person call me? And they're like, wow, we wish all banking customers were like this. And it just took me a minute, right, to say, I'll call you back to talk to this other person. I'm like, can you please tell me, is this a real phone number for this person? Because I'll call them back. And they said, yes. So there's different ways that aren't too inconvenient, don't take too long, where you can do a trust but verify to make sure that this is really kind of your health insurance, your bank account, and things like that. The other thing I would say is when you think about what you post online, I always tell people, if you can, it's best to post about where you've been, not where you are. Because where you are is patterns of life, and where you are, it does tell people you're not someplace else. So if you post, toes in the sand, drink in my hand, whatever the drink of choice is, that does broadcast that you're not home at your house. And it does broadcast patterns of life. So if you can hold off and post those wonderful pictures after you're safely where you need to be, then that can be another way to protect yourself.
Changing all my passwords now. Doing it.
That's great
advice.
advice.
I have a free tool people can take a look at. So if you go to Have I Been Pawned, you can type in, I don't personally type in my passwords there, but you can type in your email accounts, your account usernames for, whether it's Netflix or your bank account and different things like that. And it'll tell you whether or not it's been dumped on the open web or the dark web as part of a past data breach. And if it has, and you haven't changed your password in a while, go ahead and change your password.
Yikes. Okay.
It's
That's
a free tool,
terrifying.
so it's real. I check there. I have a note on my calendar, and I check once a month, and I check my kids' accounts and my husband's account and my account. And if we get a hit that's in the last 30 days, I text the person in my family and say, you need to just change your passwords and double check, make sure your multi-factor authentication is turned on. A lot of people don't realize this, but they call it like credential stuffing, like reusing an old password and making a few changes to it. And they call it credential stuffing. And if you have multi-factor authentication turned on, it says the statistic is that any cyber criminal fraudster trying to do a credential stuffing attack, reusing of a password, it stops it over 90% of the time. There are very few things that stop cyber criminals in their tracks 90% of the time. And so when you find one of those, use it. So I know multi-factor authentication can be clunky, but turn it on because it will really help you keep the fraudsters and criminals out of your accounts.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Theresa. We really appreciate your time and helpful information. It's really great.
Yeah, everything that you've written about is so, again, eye-opening, and everyone really needs to take all this very seriously. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for what you do on the podcast, and to people listening. Hope I gave you something to think about to be safer and more secure, and keep doing great work out there being internet sleuths on cases. It does matter. It really does make a difference.